Hello, my name is Sanjay Rama. I am a program manager in the Business Connectivity Services team in SharePoint 2010. This video is another installment in the series of instructional videos about business connectivity services. In this video, we will look at SecuStore service and BCS authentication using SecuStore service. Now, what is SecuStore service? SecuStore is the new single sign-on service in SharePoint 2010. It provides the capability of storing secure data like a set of credentials and the ability to map this data to a specific identity or group of identities. SecuStore is a shared service in SharePoint 2010 and can be used to store credentials of multiple external systems. The most common scenario for SecuStore service is an application trying to authenticate against a system in which the current user is known differently or has a different account for authentication. Let's go ahead and see a demo of BCS authentication using SecuStore service. In this demo, I have a SQL server that hosts a database called Contoso, and the Contoso database has a customers table that has all the customer information. The objective is to bring this data into SharePoint through an external list. If I launch SharePoint Designer, you'll notice I have a predefined XML content type called customer. And if I bring up the connection properties for this XML content type, you will see that the authentication mode is set to user's identity. I want to create a list using this XML content type. I do that by clicking Create Lists and Forms button. Let's give this list a name, Test Customer, and click OK to finish creating the list. Once that's done, I want to go ahead and preview the list by clicking the Preview in Browser button. Now I get an error that says login failed for NT authority anonymous login. This problem is called as the double hop issue. Now what exactly is the double hop issue? Let's see an example. In this topology, I have a user connecting to a SharePoint server to access an external list. BCS runtime will then connect to the external system and get the data. Now when the user connects to the SharePoint server, the user credentials are obtained by IIS, and when BCS runtime is called, the user's identity is delegated to BCS. But when BCS connects to the external system, which is on a different machine, the user's identity cannot be delegated again across the machine boundary, and this will result in an authentication exception. Now how does SecuStore solve the double hop issue? So in the same topology, when the user connects to the SharePoint server and accesses the external list, BCS will get the user's identity and then pass the user's identity to SecuStore service. Now SecuStore service will return the appropriately mapped credentials for this user, and BCS will use these credentials to connect to the external system to get the data. Now the user's identity has been mapped and stored in SecuStore, so whenever the same user accesses the external list, BCS will read the data from SecuStore. Now let's go to SharePoint Server and set up SecuStore. So let me first bring up SharePoint Central Admin. As I had mentioned before, SecuStore is a shared service, so you can manage it from Central Admin. You see SecuStore service and you click on the link here, you will see the management UI for SecuStore service. Now what we are looking at is a list of target applications. A target application is the basic building block in SecuStore. It defines the fields that are used when we connect to an external system. Let's go ahead and create a new target application by clicking the new button and bringing up the creation wizard. The first field is called target application ID. So let me type customer SSO. The target application ID is an important piece of information because this is what BCS will use when it's connecting to the external system. Let's give a display name for this target application. Let's call it customer, and let's leave the default settings for all other properties here and click next. I have to give a valid email address and then click next. Now what we see are the credential fields that will be used when this target application is called. So for this demo, I want to use two fields, the SQL user and SQL password. So I'll type in SQL user in the first field, and then the field type is a username. So I'll go ahead and set the field type to username. And the second field is password. I want to call it SQL password, and the field type is password. Now you can mask any of these fields by checking the checkbox here. So if I click next, I have to give a valid user account as the administrator for the target app. So I'll type in an account, and then once that's done, I'll click OK to finish creating the SecuStore target application. Now, how do we tell BCS to use this target application when connecting to the external system? So let's go back to SharePoint Designer and bring up the list of external content types and bring up the customer external content type. So if we go back to the properties dialog again, we'll see it is connecting to a server called demo LOB and a database called Contoso, and the authentication mode is user's identity. So now I want to change this and set it to impersonate custom identity. And in the next field, I want to give the target application name that defines this custom identity. So the target application that we just created in this demo is called Customer SSO. So I will type Customer SSO as the SecuStore application ID and then click OK. Now once that's done, let's go ahead and access the same external list again and see what happens. Now I don't get the error, but I see a link that says click here to authenticate. So I'll go ahead and click it, and I am redirected to a page that has two fields, SQL user and SQL password, the fields that we just created. If I had chosen to use a custom page, then I would have been redirected to the custom page. So I will go ahead and type the credentials for the SQL database, SQL user and the password. And then click OK. Now BCS is able to use the credentials that I just typed in and connect to the external system. And the user identity has been saved in SecuStore. So in this video we saw what is SecuStore service, how is it used to store secure data, what is the double hop issue, and how BCS authentication gets around the double hop issue using SecuStore.